start letting people in. If you're
Cool.
if you're all set.
Yeah, good.
Awesome. Okay.
I should sit with my back to that watch.
What was that going to say? No one's there.
Oh, people come. Where am I? Yeah, Kim's here.
Hi,
Hi Dan, hi Kim, hi everyone, other people I know. People I know but haven't met.
oh, lots of familiar people here. Hello.
Yeah.
Bye.
Okay, so we've just gone live on Facebook. Yeah, as we wait for people to come in, I suppose we'll just start off by introducing you, Alex, and maybe you want to introduce yourself.
Oh, you do it, Dan.
So yeah, Alex is going to give us a talk about a topic called Deep Adaptation, which is a paper by Jem Bendell, but it's going to be around the discussion of animal justice, and yeah, he's the author of the vegan memoir The Pig in Thin Air, and he was also a press and media relations lead for Animal Rebellion in the October Rebellion prior to that. So without further ado, I will pass over to you, Alex.
Cool. Thanks, Dan. Thanks everyone for coming. Nice to. I'm going to put it on speaker view so I can see everyone. Yeah, nice to see some familiar faces. People I know, some people I don't know. And I guess what I wanted to say is a couple of things. One, hopefully it will be finished before 8:30. So I was sort of aiming for like 8:15 maybe. So get 15 minutes back of your evening. The second is as well that I would rather not talk in general for long periods of time, because I personally don't learn much that way. So I'm going to ask you to do some things, and at some point, if it's okay with people, I'm just going to sort of break people out into different rooms to sort of chat about some of the stuff that I'm putting up. So I'll be sharing my screen a fair bit. So I'll just check in with everyone to see that. And I guess, you know, we're all adults here, so if anyone needs to leave, fine. And if there will be plenty of time, I hope, for sort of questions and answers at the end. And one of the things I want to say is that I'm not, I got involved with the Deep Adaptation sort of program and agenda maybe 3 years ago, when I sort of engaged with it for a commissioned project around sort of climate change, veganism. And from there, I got to work with Jem Bendell, who wrote the Deep Adaptation paper, who's a professor of sustainability and leadership at Cumbria University. And in a way, I was one of the first people engaging with it in a practical way, in terms of like turning this theory into something that was like an artistic output or like a creative output. And so I was then invited, because I had been engaged with it from early on, to be a advocate for the sort of the learnings from it, from the program, and to be able to sort of like just share it with people. So I've done that generally with people within the creative industry. So I've given talks at dance workshops, and I've done it for writers and artists, and it's been really interesting doing that. So in a way, this is even though Deep Adaptation, Extinction Rebellion, Animal Rebellion have really overlapped a lot in the past 18 months, 2 years. One of the things, you know, I've thought about it a lot in my work individually, but not necessarily collectively, about what we can do within the animal justice movement for, you know, engaging with some of these ideas. So, so what I'm going to do, I'll go through a little bit of the introduction. What I'm not going to do very much of is go through the science, you know, because one, I'm not a climate scientist, I'm not an environmental scientist, or an animal agriculture, you know, expert in that sense. What I can do is sort of like introduce the framework and how it's been developed and how I've used it, some of the key points to it and some of the key criticisms to it, and then ask people to sort of like go with me through a bit of a journey and do some exercises around it. So does that sound okay for everyone? Great, good, thank you. So I will start sharing my screen now and just check in with everyone. Can everyone see that? It says, what is deep adaptation yet?
Yep.
Great. So, from the start. Okay, great. So, what I wanted people to do is that maybe just take 30 seconds now to actually think about what you, if you know anything about it, or if you want to just have a think about what the word adaptation means to you, and also what the word then deep means to you when it's applied to adaptation. So I'm just going to give you 30 seconds to think about that.
Hi everybody, I'm sorry, but like this Eventbrite thing is driving me crazy. Beep, beep, beep.
So does anyone want to sort of speak about what they already know about deep adaptation or have thought about in terms of sort of climate adaptation, what your sort of understanding of it is? You can just wave a hand if you want to. Yeah, go on, Chris.
I actually don't know the term as a professional or Cumbrian University man applies it, but to me it just came as a kind of form of depth change to new circumstances. When you ask the question, then adding the word environmental, that's the changes to our climate that we're going to have to adapt to with the agriculture. We have to change, basically just transformations, isn't it?
Yeah.
I imagine.
Yeah, thanks.
That's my guess.
Yeah.
I don't know how else it's applied.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, or as Pete says, we're fucked, so better get used to what comes next. Yeah, in the chat. Thanks. I'm just going to share my screen again. Oh, move this over here. So the idea of deep adaptation, or where it came from, was an idea of going through the process of facing climate-induced societal collapse, but facing it together. So rather than leaving people in sort of atomized or isolated societies, like particularly Western individualist societies like the UK has and America has, actually thinking about how we can build a community to respond to what is coming down the line for us in terms of climate change. In a way, the most important part of it is it starts from not wondering if it might happen, but accepting that it is already happening, and importantly, happening unequally across the world. For many of us in the sort of developed Western world, you know, the temperate world where we are, particularly in the UK, you know, we are not experiencing it in the same way that people from you know, low-lying island states are experiencing it, or people in Bangladesh are experiencing it. But it's starting from a position of accepting that a collapse is on its way and is already happening for many societies. And if that is the case, the question is then, how do we act? You know, do we give into nihilism? Do we give into hedonism? Do we give into individualism? Or do we, is there a better way to act? And is there a better way to act than to suggest that we can save what we've got? You know, is this society, as Rupert Reed has written in some of the Extinction Rebellion literature, you know, is what we've got worth saving, or do we need to start planning for succession communities and civilizations to come? And that's sort of the big idea of it. And it started from a place of when Professor Jem Bendell wrote the paper. He submitted it to, I think, the Journal of Sustainability and Leadership, and it was rejected by that journal, this paper, where he had spent 6 months. He has an academic background long before his leadership work. in environmental science. So he took a step back from his work, looked at the subject, did 6 months of deep reading into the climate science, and came out with the conclusions that we are facing a societal collapse, and that's what the science suggests. And when he pitched this and submitted it to the journal, the academic journal, it was one, it was too radical for them, and two, they asked him to engage in the literature and do a literature review of this. And he said, well, there is no literature review for how leadership should respond to societal collapse, because every other element in leadership was very much about, we can change things. We can save the current system. We can adapt within the current system. Sorry, I'm just getting caught by the chat. And the argument in the paper, which went viral really, and which has started and seeded this whole sort of like area of conversation and discussion and dialogue, was that no, we're past that point. What we need to do is accept that societal collapse is happening. It's happening unequally, and we need to start our adaptations from that point. And underpinning all of this was a real sense of the emotional and the affective aspects of this, and not just the scientific or the practical elements of sort of how we respond, but how do we respond in an embodied way that allows us to experience the grief of the loss of our wildlife, the loss of our biodiversity, the loss of the planet, the loss of the societies, the loss of comfort. How do we actually create communities and dialogue that can deal with those emotional and effective outcomes of accepting this point of view? And it's not something we can achieve in 75 minutes on a Zoom call, but reflecting upon and building a community amongst people for how we collapse well together is really at the heart of what the deep adaptation process is about. So as I said, I'm not going to go through the science. All the resources you need for that are on GEM's website, and it's in many different versions. The original blog, the original audio, ebook, large print, different languages, etc. So it's all of that is there that you can go and have a look at if you haven't already. Thanks, Dan, for sharing that in the chat. I'm just going to stop sharing for 2 minutes and just want to just check in with people if there are any questions of clarification so far. Just put up your hand if there are. Bearing in mind, I can't see everyone all at the same time. So no, okay, cool, great. So I will share the screen again and just continue. So one of the things I did want to share though was just sort of like a little bit of my journey and as a way of explaining how I came into it and how I have responded to it, as a way of sort of prefacing the things I'm going to ask you to think about and prefacing the sort of conversations we can have. I published an article in the journal Environmental Communication back in I wrote it in 2015, I think, and it got published in 2018, called Graphs of Grief and Other, the Uses of Affect in Environmental Communication. And one of the starting points for me was this graph, which is quite well known now. And it's originally from 2009. It was a graph produced by a whole bunch of scientists, Rockstrom and our from the Stockholm Resilience Institute. And they pulled together a lot of the science and wanted to make it sort of really useful for people in terms of a graphic. And the graphic they came up with was this one, the 9 planetary boundaries. And when I first saw this, so it's divided into sort of the 9 areas of planetary sort of eco or life systems on which this entire planet, every living being on this planet is dependent. And so obviously you can see climate change at the top, novel entities, stratospheric ozone depletion, aerosol loading, ocean acidification, biochemical flows, which are nitrogen and phosphorus, which is the P and the N, freshwater use, land system change, biodiversity integrity in terms of mass and in terms of sort of, I can't remember the other one. Yeah, sorry, it's added. You can see from this that climate change is not even the worst crisis that we're facing in terms of like the biosecurity of our planet. And when I saw this graph for the first time, I cried because it represented to me such an egregious use of our home planet. And particularly, what I just want to communicate to you here now is in that top sort of, as you're looking at it, like left-hand corner at 11 o'clock, that biosphere integrity graph, if this was to scale, that would be through your roof of your home right now. It's so far off the chart, it can't fit on the chart. And that's what we're doing to the animals, the species, the plants, the trees, the forests, the oceans, the whales, everything, you know, on the planet. And that's why it really impacted me. And I therefore came into sort of like this work to think about sort of, you know, responding creatively through this commission I had about sort of the deep adaptation agenda and the language and the concepts about really wanting to sort of bring some of these issues into sort of people's everyday lives, into sort of like thinking. And this for me remains one of like the, you know, the critical and iconic issues, images of our time, in terms of thinking about how we pull together sort of all of the issues. And you know, this is what underpins the deep adaptation agenda. It's a sense that we are transgressing and are about to transgress more the safe levels for life on this planet. And if we continue to transgress those in the rate that we are, like the societies that we currently enjoy will no longer be sustainable, you know. And many people are already experiencing the fact that their communities are sort of are collapsing already. I'm just going to move on. And I guess so, you know, that graph is quite easy to find online. All of the identifications are there. Sorry, Charlie, I just can't remember what BII stands for. It's biodiversity. There's two measures of biodiversity. One in terms of the number of species, and one in terms of the mass of the amount of lives left. So I think it's that division. So one of the questions at the heart of deep adaptation is really what matters after we accept that the societies that we currently live in and enjoy are going to come to an end. Do we accept that they are going to fall through a disorderly decline into chaos and barbarism, or preferably are we going to work together collectively to create a orderly decline from our current levels of consumption, our current levels of travel, our current levels of sort of engagement, to a different but peaceful, nourishing, nurturing world? And again, like most of us here are animal activists, advocates for animal justice. One of the key things for me was about how can we communicate, how can we contribute to this orderly decline and make sure that the animals that we care about and want justice for are recognised and considered and play a role and have a voice in how we shape what matters after acceptance. I've got no other way really of communicating this to you better than about the novel that I started when I was working on some of these issues, and it was a young adult sci-fi trilogy where Alpha Centauri is blown up. It's 4 however many light years away from Earth, which means it's going to get here in 4.4 years, blow the Earth to pieces. And my character was someone who works on a farm sanctuary and wants to just protect the animals from the chaos that ensues and make sure that the animals get, you know, the amount of justice that they deserve in the society that comes after this news of collapse. That's what it inspired me to think about. And that's what it's inspired me to sort of like go on working around. So that's a question to just sort of bear in mind. What's going to matter for the world after we accept that the societies that we currently live in will no longer exist because they are just unsustainable at current rates, and that actually to transform into something that's going to survive, going to continue, will not be in the current form that we currently enjoy and live within. So that's really sort of like as hopefully as well as I can, communicating it within sort of like really sort of short period of time, what it means. Skeena Rathor, who many of you will know as like co-founder and spokesperson for Extinction Rebellion, said, and she's engaged very deeply with Deep Adaptation and works with Jem Bendell quite a lot. She said this on Westminster Bridge in London on Rebellion Day in November 2018. If we are honest with ourselves and look into our heart's deep interior, if we are honest from there, then this isn't about saving humanity. This is about our courage to love as we have never loved before. Let us live now at the edge of our courage to love. And I've covered a lot of that. This project that you can go and have a look at was the podcast project. That was the way that I responded to the idea of deep adaptation and the way that I interpreted it, which was a series of 8 podcasts which looked at what we need to relinquish, where we can build resilience, and what we need to restore. And they were the original 3 R's that Jem Bendell wrote about in his the original paper, which have been added to recently, one officially and one unofficially by me, to make it now 5 R's. And I think those are really important because they've come out of some of the criticisms that have faced deep adaptation. And one of the a number of the criticisms facing deep adaptation are about its Western, white, male, privileged starting point, even though actually Jem as an individual and the group is much more diverse than that, and Jem has recognised a lot of the criticisms of it, they still come up. One of the criticisms that was experienced was when I actually did a similar kind of talk or workshop for a bunch of artists. I was challenged by a woman of colour who works with communities of colour about sort of where are the resources. You can talk about this, nice middle-class questions of relinquishment and resilience and restoration, but actually I'm working with people who have just lost their best friend in Grenfell fire. I'm working with people who have like historic trauma and barely can, pull enough to work together to sustain their lives and their families. So how does deep adaptation help them? And so those are real criticisms that actually anything like this would need to face. It needs to be a completely intersectional approach that understands how anything that's happening under climate change is experienced unequally. And as the Anthropocene has been experienced unequally for millennia, and one of the great texts on that is Catherine Youssef's A Billion Black Anthropocenes or None, talking about the fact that, now the white Western world has woken up to societal collapse. Everyone's worried about it, but societies have been sort of collapsing and destroyed by white colonialism for a long, long time. So, it's something that's it's a live criticism and something really needs to be paid attention to. One thing I just wanted to address before we move on to a bit more of the interactive stuff was that I was engaged I was a commissioned artist by an arts agency to produce these podcasts, working from this deep adaptation program to rethink our relationships with each other and the planet. My response was a very vegan one. I did a lot of walks, I did a lot of talks around sort of climate change, veganism, our relationship in terms of how we have to relinquish this idea of us as human, superior human species. But one thing on reflection was that I don't think we really started from a point of accepting collapse, accepting that the collapse is inevitable, because actually that's a really, really hard thing to get your head around, and probably needs a lot of time speaking to a lot of people in a lot of communities to really think about what that means, and what does that mean for living your life, as a normal person in a normal Western society. it's a really difficult thing to get your head around, I think. So I think our starting point, I'm not going to read all of this out, but our starting point was a way of looking at the current environmental crisis, trying to come at it from a point of view of accepting that our current ways of living are at an end, that the fossil fuel economy is at an end. But that doesn't mean we resign ourselves to everything ending. And it's about what can we stave off? What can we secure? And how can we nourish each other and develop and live into sort of like whatever follows. So at the bottom there are the original 3 R's in Jem's paper that I responded to in my project. And they were, what do we need to relinquish and give up? Where do we need to build resilience? And what older and healthier practices and communities can we restore? One of the key questions about the Deep Adaptation agenda, one of the reasons why it was originally rejected from the journal that it was submitted to, was that it's actually too radical, it's too pessimistic. Other people, the deep ecology movement and Arne Ness from the 70s, and even before that, a long time historically, have been thinking, well, actually, we haven't been pessimistic enough about the obvious evisceration of the natural world and the planet and the fellow species that we share this planet with. And so one of the criticisms that was leveled at Deep Adaptation in terms of not really taking into account how we enact, how we come to terms with the grief and the loss and the guilt and the responsibility for what we've done to the planet and to each other, was this 4th R, reconciliation. And can we then accept what we've done, the world that we've created, whether we've done that sort of consciously or unconsciously, whether we've done it unwittingly as part of a larger community, can we reconcile with that, and can we move on to finding meaning in our lives and what we value? How we come to terms with the grief. I can hear myself coming back there. It's a horrible feeling. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to read something to you as an experience of going through sort of like this grief and learning process in like a massively truncated period of time. And I'm going to go through 5 steps. And what I would normally do when I've done this in workshops, I've done this and I've asked people to move around and actually take physical steps. This is very difficult to do with online. I've often asked people to do it with their eyes closed to really feel the impact. You might trip over a chair or a bed in your room, so you don't have to do that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out these 5 statements of sort of like a really quick summary of moving through the stages of sort of looking at, thinking about, accepting, and then thinking about what we can do after. And these are 5 sort of stages that I think anyone can sort of apply to sort of like thinking about the climate crisis and thinking about the animal emergency that we face as well within the context of that climate crisis. So what I'm going to ask to do, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'm just going to read out some statements that are like a summary and an accumulation of all of the deep adaptation thinking into these 5 steps. So actually at some point maybe they're useful for you in workshops, they're useful for you to think about in terms of framing. So this is like in a way the first tool for helping others understand sort of a more deep adaptation style accepting approach of sort of the crisis that we're in. So please feel free to sort of just sit back in your chairs, close your eyes as I sort of read these out. So the starting point is it's bad. Greenland and permafrost melt are both 70 years ahead of predictions of worst case scenario. The IPCC was cautious and unfortunately misleading with the world's best new climate models, now challenging the mainstream view. It might be too late to have a big impact on climate, as the reinforcing feedbacks could be underway, with Earth heating itself, with exponential sea level rise being a key indicator. These changes risk all of our lives, from the rural poor to the urban middle class, with the latter depending on fragile global systems that are already stressed. This is the risk of societal collapse. It's over. It's over for the call to stop climate change before it disrupts the way of life of people who thought they were immune. This has happened despite 30 years of effort to change the system. So it's over for the story of change via markets and reform. It's over for the old pragmatism. It's over for us to avoid this conversation about impending disaster. It's over for our story of control, of human domination and centrality. It's now. Millions are suffering already, and societal breakdown is happening, but already unevenly distributed. These are the first signs of the rise of the hard right, as people don't believe in their future and get angry and justifies fascism on environmental grounds. We can now no longer delay what to learn, discuss, and make choices about. We can now no longer delay making changes by letting go of old certainties, hopes, and plans. Today, we must now live according to the most important ideas or beliefs we have about what's important in life. And it's open. We don't know how bad it will get and for whom. Humans are not necessarily going to die in their billions or go extinct. It's open because we do not know when the society around us will break down. It's open because we can choose how we respond and try to influence what happens. And it's open because there aren't simple answers to this predicament. And it is okay. Climate chaos wasn't just an accident, but the result of our way of being in the world. It offers a severe mirror of our individual and collective psyche. But it's okay, at least for those of us with privilege of time to consider collapse before it occurs. It's okay because it offers us an uncompromising invitation to delve into the questions about the meaning of our lives. And it's okay because despite our sadness at suffering and destruction, life and the potential for life will go on. And it's okay because after despair, we can find meaning in new ways. One being faith that there's meaning beyond our ability to understand in a rational way and to engage again with spirituality, feeling, and each other. Okay, thank you. Is anyone willing to share their experience of that, or their experience of sort of like the fear and grief of climate change? Joachim? So I probably pronounced your name really badly there, didn't I?
That's all right. That's right. I mean, it reminds me a bit of, I don't know if you know of the Dark Mountain project. This was, I think, installed 10, 11 years ago, where a lot of former environmentalists just gave up and accepted that in a way it can't be changed and it can't be stopped. And so they started this literary and arts and graphics project, and they gave out books, etc. And they talked a lot about grief, but of course they only focused on environmental collapse, not on societal collapse. So I read a lot at the time, maybe 2 years ago. I read all the issues back, but what came out for me was, I mean, the animals still need a voice, even if things go from bad to worse. And as we currently see, there's a lot of disinterest in the animals, like we see this mass culling in the States because the slaughterhouses are not working. So if we have the collapse, I mean, the animals will be maybe affected worse at the same time.
Yeah, thanks, Joachim. Dugald Hine, who was one of the co-founders of Deep Adaptation, he came and launched he was one of the co-founders of the Dark Mountain Project. He came and launched our Deep Adaptation program in Newcastle when we read it. And I know he and Paul Kingsnorth and Jem talk regularly. Yeah, so Dugald from Dark Mountain was very engaged. And there's a lot of overlap as well between the people who engage with Deep Adaptation and Dark Mountain as well. Yeah. Thank you. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to go into a bit more of the interactive section, rather than just me carry on speaking. So I'm going to share just a little bit more about the question of these, the 4 R's. So the 4 R's have made up the basis of sort of like the Deep Adaptation framework, as it were, for how we think, how we work our way forward. They're really useful to think about, and they have been. And I'd absolutely say, Deep Adaptation very much started from a very humanist point of view. Wasn't thinking about the planet, but was not thinking about animal justice at all. To the point where the first conference that I went to and presented in Cumbria, I was promised that there would be vegan. There was no vegan food, and I had to leave and go into Ambleside and buy a portion of chips. And I was fuming. I was absolutely fuming. So I'd just come back from America working on a farm sanctuary, and I was like, how can this whole agenda be interested in sort of like, what justice and nourishing and flourishing and grief without thinking at all about the animal emergency and animal questions? So it has come from that place, but we have been shaping and sharing and pushing at it. And like all theories and concepts, sometimes they are useful for us, and then we can take them and run with them further in the way that we want to, towards sort of animal justice. And that's, I guess that's what I want to spend the rest of the time thinking about. How can we actually, is this framework at all useful for us? It's certainly integrated and embedded very much within Extinction Rebellion's thinking, for example. Can it be really useful for us as animal justice advocates in terms of starting from this point of collapse? And if we do that, and if we accept and open up spaces for grief and loss, and rethinking our approaches to sort of like, not thinking of saving what we've got, but thinking of rewriting and renewing and recreating, reprogramming what comes. Is that a useful framework for us? So I'm going to share my screen again, and just show you. These are the 4 R's of the Deep Adaptation agenda. So what do we need to relinquish? That could be anything from thinking about sort of, like our dependencies on supermarkets, right the way through to our belief in ourselves as human species, a human exceptional species, so relinquishing our very humanity. Where can we build resilience? It's very much about some perhaps practical responses, but also very much emotional, community, collective ideas of resilience. What might we want to restore? What are the perhaps not wanting to look at this through very nostalgic glasses, but what are ways of indigenous knowledges are really, really important to this. Indigenous like sort of leadership, ways of being on the land and working, permaculture, like vegan permaculture, for example. How can we restore some of this knowledge that will help us in this process? And how might we reduce suffering through reconciliation? And then the 5th one that has been added, that I've added because of the criticisms that have been levelled at this process: what resources are available, and what do we need, and what do our communities need? So these are the questions that can sort of help us think about sort of whether this is a useful framework for thinking through animal justice. And a typical Deep Adaptation conversation often goes a little something like this. And I've highlighted like the key points, the key prompts on the left, so that we can sort of come back to them in an exercise. So pain, we don't trust our institutions anymore, we're scared. Risk, you know, we're risking paralysis and we're into denial. There are things we can agree upon. It's reasonable to want to trust in the processes we engage in. It's reasonable to want to feel safe or safer. The others who obstruct, some say it's not happening, some pretend it will be fixed, some say give up. What's necessary? So this is, again, Extinction. You can see very much Extinction Rebellion's language here in terms of, you know, we need to tell the truth. And we need to rebuild institutions together to restore trust. What can we offer? What can we give by providing regenerative dialogue spaces? What do we gain by taking this approach? And what actions can we lead to people to, such as looking at the 4Rs in your life and in your local community, or within your activism and within your advocacy organizations? I can send all these slides around and everything, so you could, you know, we can have access to these, and obviously this is being recorded, so people can go back to it. And I'm asking you to write this list down later. So I'm going to ask you to do right now. I've just shown a list of 5 statements, and I want you to have a look at these statements. I'm going to give you a minute or two now just to look at these statements, and I want you to think about which one really resonates with you, that you want to talk a bit more about, because what we're going to do now is just break off into groups and have a bit of a discussion of what you've heard and how you might, how within that framework you might respond to these questions. And obviously we're all coming at it from animal advocacy, animal justice perspectives. So actually, you know, these are questions for us as animal activists. And I hope that makes sense. I'm just going to give you a minute or two to just look at these. And if you can, copy and paste. Well, you can't copy and paste on my screen, can you? But if you can write them down, or I can share them with the chat probably. Yeah, I'll be able to share them in your chat. Or indeed, screenshot it with a phone. Yes. Thanks, Gareth. I'm so 1990s. Okay, so I'm hoping you've all got one of those now. And so I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and then I'll share the text in the chat when we break out. I'm going to ask, so you've all picked one of those, and I'm going to ask you to Dan's going to put us all in groups of 3 or 4, so maybe groups of 4. And in those groups, if it's okay, just going to ask you to talk to each other and explain which is the one that stood out to you, why, and perhaps what you're thinking about it in relation to your work for animals. Is that okay, everyone? Show of hands, if that's all right. Yeah, good, thank you. Okay, brilliant. And I think we'll have 10 minutes for this, because if there's 4 people in a group, if there's 4 people in a group, then you get like a couple of minutes each and a bit of a roundup. Yeah, so we'll give you like 9, say Dan, 9 or 10 minutes, broken into groups of 4. Thank you for taking part in this, everyone. It saves me from just talking all the time and gives you a bit of opportunity to sort of meet each other and communicate.
Cool. So we'll give it 10 minutes. So we'll come back at 7:55 UK time. And you should get a notification to go into a breakout room.
Dan, is it all right if I don't join?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, cool. I can have a bit of a rest. Thanks, Dan. Right, let's see if I can share these slides. Great. Are we all back, Dan?
Seems like it. We might have lost a couple of people, but yeah, I think
Okay.
the majority of people, yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. So, does anyone want to sort of give some feedback on that? Some things that were discussed? Don't have to. Chris again?
So we're just going from group to group, or group 1, group 2?
I didn't know what groups people were in, but did you have something to feedback, Dan?
I was in group 7, so first 1, 2, 3.
We may not have. I don't know if we want to go through all of the groups. It's just like if people want to feedback. So if you're willing to share, that'd be great.
Well, I will not really take notice, but we had different approaches. So we had one in the group who is more for the physics, for the more scientist way. So they rated choose number 1, so more to have these scientific effects. And then we had the second one. So please, Kerry and Karif, if you can just add what I missed. Karif, I think it should choose number 3 because it's more this kinds of everything has to be involved, like climate is involved with, animal rights is involved with, everything must be a big pool of together coming, because everything is involved with somehow has roots somehow for the same causes, and that's this one. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Dan. Chris, did you want to share? Chris
yeah, I just thought it was lovely that both Jam and Ivan, didn't choose one in particular. Went for the we're not giving up but waking up. That included the compassion from the statement above about help, because help includes compassion. I think we were in agreement about the white Western world and it having taken the wrong roads, and also that it was such a brief period of opulence and excess that we've lived through. So a lot of transformation and transition can actually be back to not very long ago, when, for instance, my nan's generation did without the crazy stuff that we think we need now. And how the current world has let us wake up very much to recognizing what we need, not what we want or what we crave.
Yeah, very much so. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to share? No, that's fine. Okay, well, thank you for sort of like taking the time to go into those groups and talk to people, which would be nice. I'm going to just share my screen again, just to sort of move on to the next bit, which is really about, I guess, like now opening up for questions. Really, I've got a few more slides and a few more points to make, but actually, this is really the point where I sort of wanted to both open up for questions and also to ask you questions as well, like to pose these to you. What would these 4 R's or these 5 R's mean for animal justice? How could we incorporate them? What might we want to bring about, restore, relinquish, etc.? You know, how might that work? You know, what are people's initial thoughts or gut feelings or gut responses to this? And so if you have any thoughts or ideas, it'd be really great to share them. My next slide is one of gathering all of them together. But I'll certainly leave this one up for now. And also just to ask if anyone wants to ask any questions about deep adaptation, the process, the agenda, the ways to get involved, and we can sort of go from there. And then I'll finish off after that. So I'm going to stop the slide sharing now, just so I can see everyone. So does anyone have any thoughts or any questions?
I do.
Kerith, yeah.
I think I'm a little bit unclear about the framing in the first question. Can you just share why it's relinquish animal justice? I'm not, what am I not getting about that? Why are we relinquishing?
What do we need to relinquish for animal justice? What could we relinquish to help us bring about animal justice?
No, obvious.
So, yeah. So as an example, when I did my podcast commission, I did 3 of those podcasts around the subject of relinquishment, and it was, I wanted to go in a way as deep as possible. So the first one was, we need to relinquish this idea of masculinity and toxic masculinity that structures our patriarchal cultures. How can we do that? How can we get away from those ideas? The second one was, how can we relinquish beauty, these ideas of sort of aesthetic, beauty, whether that be of human physical beauty or the beauty of a carrot rather than a wonky one. Like, how can we get away from these ideas that really sort of like squash our freedom to sort of just be. But the third one was about relinquishing our humanity. And actually, I took people on a tour of where I live in Newcastle and explored the non-human life of this city, and asked people to really engage with the bats and the kittiwakes and the animal experimentation that happens here at Newcastle University. And I took people into the market and looked at the butchers to really think about how we can sort of like relinquish our sense of human supremacism, our sense of sort of superiority. So some of the questions are, what do we need to relinquish? Yeah, we might need to relinquish our attachment to sort of flying on holiday, but we also need to relinquish much more ingrained conceptual strictures on the way that we operate and the way that we've built our societies. Yeah. Kerry, Fagania?
Yeah, I just was going to give a thought that came to me about the where can we build resilience. I'll give my thought. The question obviously could be through a couple different lenses, but when I am reading that question, I'm seeing it as the resilience for the people that are in this work. It could be framed that you're talking about society at large, but the thing that's coming through is, so I'm the co-coordinator for outreach in New York City for Extinction Rebellion. And I've been doing that for over a year. And I came into this space out of the animal rights movement. And I just shared this with my breakout group. I stepped into XR hoping that there was a wider network of people and that the messaging was different. So my hope was that the non-human species voices would be lifted more to this wider audience. And I've had, New York City, I've been involved since the beginning of it. And it's been a ride, to say the least. And I was suffering burnout pretty badly in October, right after the rebellion. And I have now gravitated a lot more towards the work of Joanna Macy. And so the resilience that I care first and foremost about is of the people on this call, of the people who are really trying to do this work and to somehow really, really make that like front and center, that sort of the regenerative part of the things that a group like Extinction Rebellion brings, but also even more deeply the work of someone like Joanna Macy, because there's no way to keep doing this without having that kind of internal resilience through incredibly, challenging and depressing times. I mean, ultimately, I stand for beauty. And that beauty are, that's non-human species and diversity. So I'll go down fighting no matter what, but I also want to be able to have some joy in my life. And you can't even think strategically, without that ability to keep creating breathe space, so that would be the resilience that I would address. Again, you could be talking about it in a much bigger sense for everybody, but I care about the fighters on this call and want to help that resilience.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think so. A couple of quick responses to that would be that's why in a way, the opening line of the Deep Adaptation sort of approach is like how we face this together. And very much, and probably haven't gone into it enough really, but the really deep underpinnings of sort of the people who are working in this space is around sort of like sharing the grief, the loss, and the community building that comes through sharing. Joanna Macy is one of the central figures within the group that meets to sort of share and work on these issues. Yeah, so her thinking has very much informed and helped shape the deep adaptation agenda as it's gone along. So that's, so that dovetails really nicely. And for me, when I did my podcast project, I did two of those podcast series around resilience, and one of them was about personal resilience. And I started a PhD on climate change in 2006, and just did not have the personal resilience to deal with the misery and the depression of just immersing yourself in the situation, in the scenario, in all of the science. And it took me another 10 years to build up the resilience to be able to then come back and face it. So the personal resilience is crucial. The regenerative aspects of Extinction Rebellion and Animal Rebellion were absolutely central to, you know, their successes so far. And it's like, so how do we, like, I was chatting about this with Kerry earlier today about, so how do we build those really resilient, respectful networks within our animal justice movement? And that's it, in a way, that's the resources and the resilience is where it all starts from. You know, they are the underpinnings. Yeah. Sorry, so Dan Deluxe, and then Melanie.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I just by mistake, not by mistake, but yesterday I just followed a webinar coming from France and other countries. So to open a chapter in Luxembourg, because I have some small chapters. I don't know if you're aware of this, the worldafter.org organization. That's really an organization. I just became new in this role because some friend of me, knowing that I'm open mind for everything, so he invited me to this conversation. And it was very interesting because they want already to go to quarters in small cities everywhere to open groups and to make something, everybody involved, to have a better future and to change the mind of the peoples, and to very increase and have everybody involved in the changement of the world in case of animal abuse, in case of climate change, everything. But they want to be a big group, including everybody. That means that you go knocking to the door of your neighbor. Please, can you join the group? And we are in our street. Example, we have 10 people going from a cause and fighting for something, and going to the governments or going to the local governments or to the local ones to make changes step by steps. And the concept is not so bad, but okay. Yesterday was one of the first meetings I attended, so I was a little bit lost. But I tried to figure out about the big issues, and they have just to organize good. And the ideas could be very nice because you can involve everybody. You can involve climate change peoples. You can involve that everybody feels involved to change something in the world.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I think that is the starting point for the deep adaptation process. Actually, it's like hopefully it's a set of tools that actually also helps build communities. There's a deep adaptation forum that people can join in terms of getting more involved and engaging with it, and also, you know, obviously Facebook groups and local groups. So yeah, and I think that inclusivity is something that was really important, that we certainly experienced and tried to work more towards with as part of Animal Rebellion, when we were part of the movement of movements with Extinction Rebellion, about sort of like trying, you know, bringing everyone to the table, as it were, and finding some of that inclusivity. Yeah, thank you. Melanie.
Hey there. So I don't have my picture. See if I put my picture on. So I'm just coming from a workshop called Oppression and Movement Building. I'm wondering if anybody here has been to it. It's Oppression, Movement Building, and Our Relationships as Activists. I think that's the long version of the name. I think what they're addressing there is exactly the root of all of this. And what we're saying about our humanity is actually, yes, I'm more than in favor of relinquishing our human supremacy. However, I think that we need actually to reconnect with our humanity. In other words, our animal nature of being human, in order to see the collective trauma that has affected every single living being on this planet, but especially the collective trauma that comes from being raised as a small child in this world the way that it has been. Children are not allowed to cry. They're not allowed to, hi, Dan. Dan is in it with me. Children are not allowed to be human animals in the way our society is. And that leads to so much trauma. And that trauma leads exactly to these systems being the way that they are and continuing to be the way that they are. And I think it's evident in the way that we interact with each other, where people need to be right or wrong. There's an either or way that we look at the world. And it makes it very difficult for us to organize. For example, I was in XRNYC and I cannot begin to tell you the toxicity I experienced. And that's not blame, that's where we're at as humans. We are in a toxic soup of our own perpetuation. And I think for us to really truly get at what's happening and how to support each other, we need to get back to our own roots and into the trauma that we've been in and we continue to be in. And it's not a stuck place. Like it just needs to be talked about and faced. And we're not really doing that. Not even in the Joanna Macy workshops. We're facing grief, but we're not facing what really happened to every single one of us that brought us here.
Yeah, thank you, Melanie. You're absolutely right. I think as I've experienced it, working through, like, for me, if deep adaptation as an idea is at all useful, it's useful as a starting point for the, you start from the point of acceptance that the current societies that we live in are not sustainable and are not going to continue. And when you start at that point, you do go through a process of feeling grief and loss. And that's actually comes back to what Kerith said earlier about actually that's one way of getting to a point of, where you're starting from, and you build resilience from there individually, then collectively, and in community levels. And that's the process that will lead to having enough of resilience to deal with the trauma that we do experience living in toxic, very, very toxic societies. And I don't have any answers, to that. I'm working as much as I can with the knowledge and the people around me as everyone else is. And I think that there are one of the good things about sort of like the forums that Deep Adaptation has provided, like the death cafes that they are running, is the space to bring these conversations up in deep listening ways, not to fix things straight away, but just to listen to people and have all of these things shared so we can actually think about it and build that into our own personal resilience, build it into our collectives and communities. Yeah.
There's a measure of self-reflection that I think is missing in a lot of our work right now, and that's what I'm afraid of. I think what's happening is it's very easy for us to become comfortable in that victim mentality where we don't see our own part in keeping ourselves in this dynamic.
Yeah, thank you.
I think it's really important.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Nunu, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking maybe that too much resilience is gonna be bad for us, because for me it's rage and seeing what is not happening that moves me. So if I become too much resilient, don't you think we're gonna just like accept everything and do nothing? Isn't that like that? Does it make sense?
Yeah, no, I understand that. Thank you for raising that. And nearly every workshop I've ever done on this subject, you know, if we were in a room together and we had a few hours, I would probably send you off into groups of 4, and be thinking about one group thinking about resilience, one group thinking about restoration, and the group who gets sent to do resilience always have the hardest time, because of many of the issues that you've just raised, but about the word. The word is not necessarily the most useful word, you know, and because of the issues that it brings up. Or maybe it's a really useful word because of the issues it brings up. And I think it's about very much a 6R could be rage. You know, one of the R's could be rage. You know, and actually then it would identify the fact that resilience is not about quelling or quashing that urgency, you know. So I've spoken a lot about grief and loss, but actually, you know, the flip side of that is the rage and the anger of what we've done, you know, and that's, you know, very much fed a lot of good activism. So it's very much not about, you know, if you spend a bit of time with it, it's very much not about quashing that rage at all. It's very much about building the resilience in terms of what comes after. Thinking about the systems we live in and also the personal resilience. Because, and again, I'm sure we all have our own individual stories to tell. My story of I wasn't resilient enough personally. I didn't have enough mental capacity to deal with this subject 15 years ago. And I actually went on a personal journey to build up that resilience to be able to then to turn back to it and face it. And I didn't lose my rage in that sense, you know, so it wasn't, so they're not the two, you know, they're not the two, I probably lost a bit of recklessness, which is probably a good thing, but I didn't lose the rage. So, yeah. But that's what the framework is meant to do, and maybe there should be a 6R, which is rage.
Thank you.
Yeah. So from Ivan, which is more important, the right to the planet, the environment, or the right of the sentient beings living on the planet?
I was just going to say, Alex, we've got Dan and then we've got Kerry. I've got a question.
Okay. Oh yeah. Sorry, I didn't see that.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Thank you. Just by my own experience. You hear me?
Yeah. Can we? If you don't have a question, can we move on to Kerry with the question? Is that all right? So making sure that.
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
No problem. Only because we're just running.
I tried my best.
Kerry?
Yeah. No. Just coming.
You mentioned death cafes. Could you just tell us what that's about quickly?
Yeah, there's my last slide actually. I'll show it. They're basically death cafes have been running for a long time outside of Deep Adaptation, but they are a space. They're a space that are hosted to talk about death. So they're not for people who've just been recently bereaved, but they are spaces to talk about our experience of mortality and our fears or wonder or relationship with death in our culture, so individually and collectively. And Deep Adaptation have started running them, you know, so like trying to like bring together that really nice safe space and that sense of the ability to talk about some of these issues, because essentially what we're facing obviously we're all mortal, but we're facing the collective death. We've always been facing the collective death of billions of species, millions of animals every day, individuals every day. So it's a safe and respectful place to actually really focus in on some of those issues. And so Deep Adaptation have been running some animal rebellion death cafe would be a brilliant thing to do, because we could actually think about some of these issues within the broader, the work that we do.
I just want to add that on a personal level, for many things that I've struggled with in life, a point where I was able to talk about death with people, and I've been able to explore it more. It's really helped. So I think if anyone's struggling with grief, it might be a good idea to look at some resources. There's a YouTube channel of a mortician, and she speaks really frankly about death in a really lovely way. I'll put it in the chat for everyone.
Right. Joachim, did you want to ask a question? Did I see your hand go up? No. Okay, brilliant.
Ivan's got a question.
Who's that?
Ivan in the chat.
Oh, Ivan, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the question is, what's more important, the rights of the planet, the environment, or the rights of sentient beings living on the planet? I don't know. I haven't been really I mean, who am I to answer that? There's loads of people on this call who could probably answer that better than me. From my point of view, we're in Animal Rebellion, when we worked there, we didn't really talk about rights. We spoke about justice, and we spoke a lot about love. And I think that the balancing act we did there for Animal Rebellion was about sort of understanding the urgency of the climate crisis is going to affect every being on this planet. So it wasn't so much about the rights of the planet or the rights of sentient beings. It's very much about sort of justice and flourishing for all beings, and how we actually, it's not a competition between the two, as Kim says, much more elegantly than I was managing there. Thank you. Dan Kidby?
Yes. Yeah.
Dan,
which Dan?
Dan?
So I was just going to come back on that topic around death. I mean, so I used to work in a hospice, coordinating volunteers on the ward, and so I used to spend 5 days a week on a ward of a hospice. And during that time, you experience so many people coming through and departing, and so many families going through that process of grief. And something that's really profound around that experience is that you always see the other side of that. You see the process, and you witness that process with so many people. And for the vast majority, there is an after, there's a recovery, there's a restoration, there's a coming to terms. And so I think it just, for me, having that experience, I worked there for a year, and having that experience just really gave me a strong grounding, and it really released some of that fear, I think. I mean, obviously, this isn't something that we can do with respect to the breakdown of civilization and the planet, but we can look back to history, and we can see that civilizations have risen and fallen over and over again. So maybe there's something to learn there, but there is always an after, and there is always a recovery to some extent.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, and thinking about that in the context of our work in animal justice, I think one of the things, it's really easy to think, and we say it to each other a lot all the time, don't we? Many people can't see the end of animal exploitation in our lifetimes. We don't think it's going to happen. Others of us think, well, that's our goal, that's what we're aiming for. And it's these questions of sort of acceptance around what we can achieve in our lifetimes, what we can achieve for other beings, and how that's related to sort of these deeper questions of the trauma of the societies we live in, the ways to build resilience in ourselves and communities. I think death is at the heart of that, and I think if the Deep Adaptation agenda or program has done anything, it's sort of helped bring some of those issues into conversation. So we've only got 5 minutes left, so I'm just going to sort of, thanks for all your questions and input. It's been really good, thank you. So I'm just going to go back to sharing the screen. for a moment, just for the last few slides, because just what I want to sort of share is just move on again. So thinking about, we can, maybe people can start to think, is this framework, are these ideas useful in our conversations? Are they something that we can think about in our work for animal justice? And if they are, there's a chart you can fill in. But one of the other things and again, Dan will send out the slides, to share them for anyone, is that this is a process of, one of those typical conversations that I pointed out that often happen when we're talking about these issues. If we're talking about climate-induced collapse, how would it develop towards our goal of animal justice, to use this kind of thinking or framework? And it might be go through that process of thinking, well, what kind of pain do we feel in relation to our work for animals in these scenarios? What kind of risks do we face if we're not looking starkly at the facts? What's it reasonable to agree upon in terms of like a vision for the future of what comes after? And what we I think need to do as animal justice advocates is make the vision that we have reasonable, something that can be agreed upon. Because that for me is like, a large part of the work. It's about shifting the Overton window. It's making the public discourse normal around plant-based food system, animal justice. How do we obviously tackle those who disagree with us? And I think actually that's where a lot of the energy goes, actually, certainly on social media, and it's not really a great use of the energy. And what is necessary? So more truth-telling. So how do we face the crisis, but how do we also face the animal emergency crisis? And actually sort of like, how do we tell that truth within the context of the climate emergency? And I think, again, Animal Rebellion was brilliant at pulling together, you can't fix the climate emergency without facing the animal emergency. You have to, the two of them are completely intertwined. Really important to think about as us as animal justice advocates, what we can offer, what spaces we're creating, like the spaces for resilience and regeneration and regenerative culture. And how do we do that for all beings? And I think an internal question really for us is like, if we start from the point of accepting collapse is on the way, and then we're not going to fix the society we have, but we need to start succession planning for the next one, what do we gain from taking that approach, and what do animals gain from taking that approach? And I think in a way, that's probably the most useful of these questions. And then what actions can people do? What can people actively do once you convince them collapse is on the way? We need to make sure that animal justice is part of the future. What actions can we give people to do? Such as join Animal Rebellion, join Extinction Rebellion, sort of get engaged in these practices. So that for me is just sort of hopefully a summary of some of the things, hopefully you can take away from this and think about and, gain something from engaging perhaps a little bit more with deep adaptation. As I said, this has been a really brief overview and introduction to sort of the papers, the ideas, but at least hopefully it's giving you some, some food for thought. And here it just some of the links and some of the things that are coming up that I thought you might be interested in. So there's a Death Cafe actually happening tomorrow that you can join. And if you go to this deepadaptation.ning.com link or the Facebook group there, you'll be able to find out the information about it. There's one coming up next Monday on deep listening, which I think is a really great skill. And then obviously there's an interview, Q&A with Skeena Rathor from Extinction Rebellion coming up in July. And there's loads and loads and loads of more events coming up as well. So I'll just give you a second to just jot down any of those. Great. Okay. Well, I hope that's been useful for you, or at least a good introduction to stimulate some ideas where you might want to go next if you want to take it further. And yeah, any feedback, feel free to feedback. I'm on Facebook or Twitter or whatever. Anything else, Dan?
No, all good. I mean, thank you so much for your time, Alex. It's definitely a subject amongst many, which it's plenty for people to think about, and I hope that like people go away from it just sort of yeah, just wondering how they can get involved. I've just posted a link to some of the other talks that we're hosting. We have Hope Bohanek on Friday, who has been an animal rights activist for the last 25 years. So that's coming up next on the Alone Together program. But yeah, any more information, take a look at the Deep Adaptation website, take a look at the Animal Rebellion website, and yeah, have a great evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Alex.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanks for engaging.